Well, welcome to the Heart of the Black Madonna YouTube channel with me, your host, Stephanie Georgiev. Thank you so much for spending your valuable time with me. For this episode, we will be exploring the Marian festivals of August. For those of you who have subscribed, thank you so much, and welcome to all the new subscribers. I look forward to sharing this journey with you. In the Northern Hemisphere, August is a month that is usually quite hot. There is a feeling almost of stagnation as nature does her final ripening before the harvest. In fact, August is for many crops the beginning of the harvest season. One of the more interesting aspects of history is how calendars have been designed. There are many approaches to this, obviously depending on the geographical location, as well as the governing bodies of a certain age. In the modern era, with all the travel and establishment of nation states, getting specific dates everyone could agree upon was no small feat. Trying to fit in human needs over the reality of the earth circling around the sun did not fit neatly into any system. Our current calendar is called the Gregorian Calendar because it was introduced by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582. The month of August is the 8th of the year in both the Gregorian and Julian calendar. The latter was the agreed upon calendar still used in Orthodox Christianity because, well, they don't recognize the Roman papacy after 1054, hence the reason they proudly proclaim themselves as Orthodox. No one can explain to me why the Christian festivals are different between the Western Church and the Orthodox Church, especially Easter, but that's a whole nother conversation. The Marian festivals during August are the Festival of Our Lady of the Angels, which is on August 2nd, and the other is the Dormition of Mary, also called the Assumption of Mary. The Festival of Our Lady of the Angels is a Franciscan festival, the commemoration of the day that St. Francis of Assisi came upon the ruins of a small church, more of a chapel actually, at the foothills of Assisi in Italy. He received his major conversion moment at this church where he heard the charge to rebuild my church and took it literally in terms of fixing up the chapel as well as figuratively in terms of his mission to bring the church back to its original intent, meaning the whole Christian movement, the whole church, particularly in the West. As a Southern Californian, I just learned a bit of trivia that actually relates to this event. The City of Angels, or Los Angeles, California, is actually related to this festival. The name of my almost hometown, Megalopolis, is the shortened version of the original city name, which grew up around one of the Franciscan missions in the region. The original name of the pioneer town was El Pueblo de Nuestra Señora la Reina de los Ángeles de Porciúncula. In English, that means the city of Our Lady, the Queen of Angels of the Little Portion. As you can imagine, this would not fit on t-shirts unless the person was of a very wide girth. So it was shortened to Los Angeles. In 1209, back in Italy, after returning from a visit to Pope Innocent III, during which Francis received permission to form a religious order, Francis and the first brothers took up residence in the little chapel. The formal name of the chapel was Our Lady, Queen of Angels. When Francis was near his death, he asked to be taken to the chapel where for several days he and his brothers prayed before he departed this world. I had the deep pleasure of visiting this chapel, as well as Assisi several years ago. What is so interesting is this humble little stone structure, which was at the heart of the Franciscan movement. And the Franciscan movement is dedicated to serving the poor and marginalized. Outside of this chapel, there's this ornate cathedral built around it. One of the things that Francis wanted the church to do was to embrace Holy Lady poverty. He felt that all the wealth and earthly power of the Catholic Church at the time was distracting people from the heart of Christianity. Francis and his lady counterpart, St. Clare of Assisi, fought tooth and nail to be able to embrace poverty as part of their respective orders' charters. So after Francis was dead, this very large, expensive, beautiful, I might add, church was built over the humble chapel of Our Lady of the Angels. In 1997, Assisi was struck by a very strong earthquake, which caused a large portion of the cathedral to collapse, but the small chapel was unscathed. This was very symbolic, if you ask me. It is also of note that La Negrita, the Black Madonna of Costa Rica, was discovered by a native peasant girl on this day, August 2nd, in 1635. The Franciscans were very active in this region, so who knows what the connection is, but I find it fascinating all the same. Again, the symbolism is very significant. I invite my viewers to listen to my podcast, The Black Madonna Speaks, on the Black Madonna of Costa Rica to hear more about this unique Black Madonna. The other August Marian festivals are not all that known among Western Protestant Christians, but are very special to Catholics and Orthodox Christians. Again, we have different dates according to the tradition, but the commemoration is the same. In the Western tradition, the festival is the Assumption of the Virgin Mary, and this happens on the 15th of August. And in the Eastern tradition, it's called the Dormition of Mary, also known as Theotokos, or God-bearer. And this happens later in August. Each tradition is the recognition of what happened to Mary when she died, and in many ways reflects the difficulty that humans have and had regarding the nature of Christ and his relationship to his mother. It's also of note in the Eastern tradition, there's a fast that's associated with the Dormition of Mary, which lasts almost a month long, similar to the fasts in Lent. If we look to the New Testament, the main information regarding Mary is in the Gospels, as well as the book of Acts. Only two Gospels have nativity stories, that's Luke and Matthew, but each Gospel talks about certain miracles that Jesus performed upon the prompting from his mother and her witnessing the crucifixion. In the book of Acts, Mary is a center figure in the birth of the Holy Spirit, which is the festival of Pentecost. Mary has been more of a controversial figure in the history of the Christian movement than Jesus, if one can imagine that. In my opinion, all the controversy regarding both Mary and Jesus is essentially trying to comprehend a mystical fact with materialistic reasoning. The old apples and oranges motto fits perfectly here. It was beyond the comprehension of the people at the time, the mystery of Golgotha, what exactly happened. How could a God have three aspects, meaning Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and yet be one God? How could a God come to earth and become human and be able to voluntarily suffer such abuse and an execution? How could that human being rise from the dead? And then, to sound a bit glib and mimic a modern movie title, what about Mary? Entire schisms in the early church revolved on how to comprehend Mary. Was she human? How was she conceived? Who were her parents? What did she do before Jesus was born? And mostly what confused people and theologians alike was what happened to her after she died. How could the mother of a god die? In order to give birth to a god, didn't you have to be one as well? The early church debated, theorized, and argued over Mary for centuries. Early apocryphal literature and many books not included in the Bible that were later discovered in both the Nag Hammadi Library and the Dead Sea Scrolls attempt to define Mary and gave her supernatural powers and described her childhood and her activities after the resurrection, as well as how she passed into the next life and the nature of that event, essentially mixing up both supernatural and the material in the process. At the time of the incarnation, humanity had distanced itself quite a bit from divinity, but there was still the opportunity for direct communication with the spiritual world. After the resurrection, the relationship between humanity and the spiritual world changed dramatically. But the main difference was that everyone had access to divinity, not just initiated elites. Now it was up to every individual to reach out to the spiritual world to create a relationship. But the separation continued between the spiritual world and humanity. One way that humans tried to keep direct communication going, say that what happened in the oracles and mystery centers, was to think that objects could contain divinity. Relics are not the sole purview of Christianity, but they became quite the rage starting in the centuries after the incarnation. People thought if they possessed relics of the saints or even of Jesus and Mary, that miracles could happen. If they could not possess them, then at least they could look at them and touch them, and amazing things would occur. In 451 AD, at the Council of Chalcedon, which is also known as the Fourth Ecumenical Council, quite a debate was going on. The major debate at this council was trying to understand the human and divine nature of Christ. To add to the mix of this debate, Emperor Marcian, who was present at this council, said that he wanted to possess the body of the Virgin Mary. There was a tomb for her in Jerusalem. I cannot find out how this was determined to be the tomb of Mary, whether St. Helena of the Cross declared its existence or what. But in any case, there was quite a story associated with this location. St. Juvenal, the Bishop of Jerusalem at the time, was present at the Council of Chalcedon. He had quite the story as to why the emperor's request could not be granted. We find in the apocryphal literature, and the books range from the Proto-Gospel of James, the Dormition of Mary, Mary's Book of Repose, and the Gospel of Bartholomew, the tale of the death and passing of Mary. And this is the tale that was told Emperor Marcian at the Council of Chalcedon. According to these legends, Mary was visited by an angel telling her of her impending death. Some legends say she was in Ephesus. Others place her back in Jerusalem. In any case, when she knew her death was near, she sent a spiritual message to the apostles who were by now evangelizing all over the known world at the time. They received the divine message that Mary was about to depart, so they all gathered in Jerusalem, except Thomas, who always seems to miss these sort of things. She met with the 11 apostles, and they all received final blessings and messages from Mary, and then she passed. She was carried on a litter and placed in a tomb in Jerusalem. Thomas arrived 3 days later and was unconvinced that Mary had died, in spite of all the other apostles telling him that it had happened. He demanded to be taken to the tomb, They opened the door, and there was no body present. All concluded that Mary had been taken to heaven, just as Jesus did. While Jesus rose from the dead on the third day, he did not ascend until 40 days afterwards. Mary apparently went to heaven on the third day. When we examine the art of this event, we often see Jesus above the Virgin holding a baby. This is the symbol of Christ carrying Mary's spirit to heaven. It is an interesting arc to compare the nativity pictures where Mary is kneeling or lying next to the infant Jesus, and then at her death, Jesus is carrying her infant soul to heaven. In the Western tradition, the official dogma of the Assumption did not happen until 1950 by Pope Pius XII. Emil Bach, in his book, The Threefold Mary, points out something quite remarkable. He states that in the beginning of the New Testament Gospels, Luke speaks of Mary and the birth of Jesus in the manger. This image reminds us of our paradisical origins. Mary is a young, innocent girl. When we see these images of the Nativity, we hearken back to our own origins, when life and humanity was quite simple. Bach goes on to explore that at the end of the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, we read in chapter 12 of the woman clothed with the sun, pregnant and travailing with labor in the desert, with a serpent at her heels, waiting to snatch the infant. As Mary is historical, humans as well as metaphysical, she has many purposes. In my estimation, Mary is the first to say yes to the Christ impulse, the first to recognize how the history of the cosmos will change with her participation. With the incarnation, cosmic history was transformed, and our role as humans in the cosmos was also transformed. We transform creation by saying yes to love, yes to community. Mary could have said no, but she said to the Archangel Gabriel, "May your word be fulfilled in me." The dogma of the Assumption was proclaimed in the West in the years after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The gates of hell had been unleashed with this human-made catastrophe. It is of note that the bombing of these Japanese cities were at the center of the Christian communities in Japan. And the first one happened on the festival of the Transfiguration of Christ. The event is recorded in Matthew 17, Luke 9, and Mark 9. The Transfiguration was when Christ went to Mount Tabor and revealed himself to be the Christ, the embodiment of divine love, for the first time to Peter, James, and John. After the bombing of Japan in 1945, for the first time in recorded human history, human logic and reason created a method to permanently end all of life on Earth. For me, it is no accident or coincidence that the dogma of the Assumption was announced as religious communities searched for a counter to the suicide mission of humanity, which we are still on to a large extent. And this image is what was left of the Church of the Immaculate Conception in Nagasaki after the bombing. I think it's a profound image that Mary was the one that endured. The Assumption of Mary is a profound symbol of the triumph of spirit over matter. Mary is the symbol of the highest potential of humanity to transform the cosmos with love. The essence of who we are is incorruptible, and it is actually virginal. A lovely custom from the Middle Ages associated with the Assumption of Mary is to celebrate herbs, actually called the blessings of the herbs, to see Mary as the mother of herbs. This tradition is still widely practiced in Germanic and Slavic communities. Whatever you do this month of August, whatever you celebrate, I hope you recognize the example of the Virgin Mary, that you can help transform the cosmos with your loving actions. Thank you so much for spending your time with me, and blessings on your journey.